Good evening, welcome to the Weekly Word. We're actually filming this on Easter Sunday. I know you're not watching it till at least next Thursday when it launches, but we're in the churchyard for our outdoor adventure today. Just outside the church here, looking at springtime. Springtime is it's preaching its own Easter story, telling us about new life from the dead. Everything's coming back to life, and you may hear the birds chirping and see the trees coming out. I love early spring here in East Tennessee. The first thing you start seeing is a little bit of white patches in the woods, and used to be that was always, you know, it was a sarvis tree, spelled service, pronounced sarvis by the locals, but it's just as likely anymore it's one of them Bradford pears. They're taking over the land. But then about the third tree or so that blooms is the beautiful redbuds. This one's right here on the edge of our churchyard. It had a lot more blooms on it about a week ago, but you can see how they come right out of the stem itself. Such a beautiful thing in the early woods, and a lot of people don't know this, but you can do this. They're actually edible. Didn't really say they was tasty, but they are edible. And they're supposed to be a really good source of vitamin C. Would you believe that? That's something good to file in the back of your mind sometime in case the hard times ever come. You can eat redbuds anyway. Love the redbuds. But right on the heels of the redbuds is, guess what? Then we start seeing the dogwoods. And let me say this about the redbud tree before we leave it too. According to the Smoky Mountain Wildflower book, which I also learned, you won't see these above about 1,500 feet of elevation in the mountains. They stop growing around 1,500 feet. But according to the Smoky Mountain Wildflower book, this is also known by some folks as the Judas tree, because the Appalachian legend said that Judas hung himself on a redbud tree. I don't know if they had redbuds over there or not, but the Bible does say that Judas went out and hung himself. You know why he hung himself? Well, he betrayed Christ, and he felt guilty about it, so he committed suicide. Psychologists sometimes say that people have a guilt complex. You know why people have a guilt complex? Because they're guilty. But the good news is that Jesus died to save us from our sins and our shame and our guilt too. All right, shame and guilt can be a good thing though, to bring us to Christ. Let's leave the redbud tree or the Judas tree, and we'll slowly walk across the church lawn here, and we're not too far away from a dogwood tree. And the dogwood tree, let me see if I can find it here. Right on around the bend here. Yeah, I see it blooming right around here. The dogwoods bloom just a little bit after the redbuds. Let me pull down a bloom right here. We talked about the legend of the redbud tree and Judas hanging himself. You probably know more about, most people are familiar with the legend of the dogwood tree. The dogwood tree is supposed to be where the legend goes that Christ was crucified on a cross made out of dogwood. Now, once again, that's Appalachian legend, but it's kind of neat to know it. And after the crucifixion, that the dogwood tree never grew big enough to make a cross out of again. It just grew small and all gnarly and curled up. But if you look at the blooms real close, they tell you that you can see the crown of thorns right in the middle of them. And right up here you can begin to see the drops of blood where Jesus was crucified. That's kind of neat, but one thing's for sure. We know that Jesus did die on the cross for us. But don't ever forget, that cross wasn't the end of the story. The empty tomb was 3 days later. And the empty tomb means that the Jesus story still goes on. He's still with us today through the Spirit of God. Hope you know him in the spirit of grace and pardon. See you next week.